Our first opening session is Dr. Steve Harmon. We're very, very fortunate, of course, in Winnet Tech to have such incredible people involved in our community, and Stephen is one of those. He serves as the Associate Dean of Research at Georgia Tech Professional Education, or GTPE. He's Director of Educational Innovation at the Center for 21st Century Universities, otherwise known as C21U, and as professor of the Georgia Tech College of Design. Very interesting background. At GTPE and C21U, he leads the invention, prototyping, and validation efforts associated with educational innovation and with managing facilities available to all Georgia Tech researchers and faculty members. He's authored over 120 professional publications and presentations, and was the 2011 recipient of the Georgia State University's Innovative Instructional Award. Please welcome Stephen Harmon.
Thanks, Rob. Congratulations. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you, Rob, for that nice introduction and the great lead-in. He said something that made me think of some perspective of what I'm going to talk to you about, and that was back in the early days, you needed to be 5 years ahead of where everything was in order to make standards for that. And I think that's my hope today, is not to put you 5 years ahead, but to give you perspective on where things may be going with respect to AI in education. That's a tough call, because you've seen how fast AI is moving, and I'm not hoping to tell you, what's going to happen next month in AI even, but maybe give you perspective. Alan Kay was a Xerox PARC researcher and fellow at Apple Computer who said perspective is worth 80 IQ points. If you can gain different perspective on something, you're 80 points smarter. So that's my goal today, is give us some perspective and make us a little bit smarter about where AI might be going in terms of education and what we can do about it. But to do that, to think about the future, I find it helpful to start with the past. I just learned how to use this, by the way, so I'm happy about that. And I'm going to start way back at the invention of chess. And I don't know when that was, but it was a long time ago, probably in India, people think. And when the chess was invented, the legend has it that the inventor went to the king and said, I've invented this great game. And the king loved it so much, he said, I'll give you anything in the kingdom that you want. You just name it, it's yours. And the chess inventor was a pretty smart person, so he said, well, all I want, Your Majesty, is 1 grain of rice doubled on each square of the chessboard. So give me 1 grain of rice on the first square, next day give me 2 grains on the second square, 4 grains on the third square the next day, and so forth. And the king thought, well, that's a bargain. I got this great game that's everybody's gonna play it, last forever, and all you want is some rice, I'm in. The problem was, the king and us, we have a very hard time understanding exponential growth. It's hard for our human minds to grasp what it means to grow exponentially. Because you see, on the first part of the chessboard, it doesn't add up to very much. You got a grain, 2 grains, 4 grains, 6 grains, and so forth and so on. In fact, for the whole first half of the chessboard, the exponential growth is not a lot. It gets to be a little bit. But over time, about 6 weeks in, you really start to see something. So 6 weeks in, you're up to about 6 trillion grains of rice. That's hard for us to comprehend, and I'm going to talk about numbers a little more later. But here's an example. If this was a stack of $6 trillion in $100 bills, that little tiny figure to the left would be a person. 6 trillion is a really, really large number. But that's only halfway through the chessboard. If you end up going all the way through, in the first half of the chessboard, you end up with about 118 tons of rice. In the second half of the chessboard, by the end, you end up with 508, I don't know how many that is, quadrillion? It's a lot of rice. It's so much rice that if you took those rice pieces and you line them up end to end, how far do you think it would stretch? Any ideas? What's your guess? Someone over here? Pluto. Thank you very much. One answer I could hear, and I'll go with that one. It would stretch as far as Pluto. And then it would keep going. In fact, the rice would go all the way out to Alpha Centauri and then back for that. That's how much exponential growth gets us with just grains of rice. Why do we care about that? Is because we're in a time of exponential growth in our digital infrastructure. And I've listed 4 things here. There are many, many more we could look at to look at exponential growth. One is computing processing. You're familiar with Moore's law that says processing doubles every 18 months. People have been predicting the end of this for a long, long time. Hasn't happened, it still hasn't happened, and it looks like it's going to continue for quite some time, even with our current technologies. And that's not thinking about things like quantum computing and other ways of thinking about computing. So processing is doubling exponentially. Bandwidth is doubling exponentially as well. About every 9 months, we're able to transmit twice as much information as we could prior to that. Storage also doubling exponentially every 12 months. And then the one that really is mind-boggling is content. Content doubles exponentially at 2 to the n, where n is the number of people who are contributing content. In other words, in today's society, the number of people who are connected to the internet. All of us are contributing content in some way. So huge, huge growths in content. In fact, to look at all of these things, Ray Kurzweil, you may be familiar with, wrote a book called The Singularity is Near. Has a new one coming out called The Singularity is Nearer. And he looked at the exponential growth of computer processing power starting back in the 1900s at the earliest things you could call computers. And he found, sure enough, if you plotted out how much processing, how many calculations per second do you get for $1,000? And it grows exponentially. And so what he found was by 2023, we should have a human brain's worth of calculating power for about $1,000. And it turns out to be the case. By 2050, $1,000 will get us all human brains calculating power. For about what you pay for a refrigerator, you get the power of all human brains calculating. And he updated this recently, so here's the same graph but on a logarithmic scale. And in a logarithmic scale, that means it's a straight line. So you still see the exponential growth. And sure enough, in 2023, we're right there. We've been right along where he says we ought to be in processing power. That's not slowing down. That's going to continue. It's hard for us to grasp this. So if you look at this graphic here, this is how long does it take to get to human brain power if you're filling up Lake Michigan 1 drop of water at a time. And I'll run this a few times. So filling it up exponentially, when things are happening exponentially, it looks like nothing is happening for a really, really long time. And then suddenly everything happens at once. And that's kind of where we are in this processing power scale. We're beginning to see processing go so fast, we're at the point now we actually see movement. We see it happening really, really quickly. Information, as I said, doing the same thing, doubling at enormous rates. This has big impacts on us. And we'll see in a second. In order to understand that, though, I had to rethink about numbers and what numbers mean. So let's say you know what a megabyte is, and that's a megabyte represented. When I started out computing, it was kilobytes. And we were super excited, just to get 212 kilobytes or whatever it was, 256. And a megabyte, wow, that's amazing. But a megabyte, 1,000 megabytes is a gigabyte. And that was always exciting too, and I had a gigabyte storage device. 1,000 gigabytes is a terabyte, and most of us now are probably using some sort of terabyte drives locally for that. That's become commonplace. Let's reset that. Let's say that's a terabyte, we shrunk it back down. 1,000 terabytes is a petabyte. 1,000 petabytes is an exabyte. By the way, back on the chessboard, the exabyte was the end of the chessboard. So by the time you got to the end of the chessboard in grains of rice, that was 9 exabytes of that. One more time, 1,000 exabytes is a zettabyte. If a gigabyte is the same volume of a cup of coffee, a zettabyte is the same volume as the Great Wall of China. That's the difference between them. It's a huge difference and very difficult for us to grasp that. Why we care is from the dawn of time till about 2003, humans had created about 5 exabytes of information. That's all of it. There was a sum total of it. In 2011, In 2011, we had created about 1.8 zettabytes of information. By next year, we'll have created 463 zettabytes of information. So this exponential growth means that every year we've created twice as much information as we have from this year back to the beginning of time. It's not just we've added on to it, we've doubled the amount we've created forever. And this person is saying that's a lot of data. Yottabyte is the next one, by the way, after zettabyte. A yottabyte is 24 zeros after something like that. And we're in this stage now where we're dealing with this much information. Part of the issue with that is we're humans. We've only been around about 15,000 generations. That's how long our brains have evolved. And for most of that time, we've evolved to live in small, isolated communities for the most part, where we didn't have a lot of information. I've heard that my grandparents probably came into contact with as much information as their lifetimes as is contained in today's Sunday New York Times with that. So even in our very recent times, the amount of information we have to deal with is grown exponentially. Since the printing press, which is sort of seen as the dawn of the information age, there have only been 21 generations of humans. That's not a lot of time for us to evolve to deal with this. We have a hard time keeping up, and that's only going to get worse. Remember, exponential, doubling every year. So how did we evolve to cope with all this information, or even the little bits of information? Well, we evolved not to cope with all of it. We evolved to cope with a tiny bit. And I'll give you an example of how we did. There's a famous story out of India again. It's a 6-word story. So somebody read this and tell me what the story is. What do you think? The tiger ate the hunter. Exactly right. But you know what? You just made that up. All you know is there's 6 words: a tiger, a hunter, a tiger. Maybe 2 tigers walked by. Maybe the hunter walked in the other direction. We don't know. We are geared for narrative bias. Our brains will fill in information where we don't have it because we love stories. We learn by stories. We've evolved to learn by stories. I put a lot of stories in this talk because I'm taking advantage of that. So that also, by the way, is something that we like generative AI for, ChatGPT and large language models. It can make up stories, and we're hardwired to have those stories. So it fits really well to where we are now. But we're no longer in a time where these stories suffice to help us navigate the way we do things. This, by the way, I think, too, is why we see such a plethora of disinformation and misinformation. Because where there is a lack of information, we as humans are going to fill it in. We'll add something in there. It doesn't matter if it's right or not. Just like ChatGPT, we'll add something in. It doesn't matter if it's right or not. We're making a story out of it. So how do we respond to this? This incredible change, this super fast pacing that is going on. What are we going to do as humanity to really keep up and get us out of this ecological mismatch, in a sense, where our brains have not evolved to keep up with our technology? Well, we have had a history of this. We could do what this guy did and sort of be like him, that William Huskisson, who on 15th September 1830 became the first person ever to be run over by a train. He was a member of British Parliament, and this new locomotive engine was coming, and appropriately named the Rocket. And so a lot of members of Parliament went out to see the train come by, and he saw it coming down the tracks, and he went out on the tracks to look at it better. He had never seen anything that large move that fast. He had no sense of the perspective of what was geared for that. And unfortunately, he was run over by the train. Or we could follow what we've done here. What do you think that automobile used to be called? Horseless carriage. In the early days of cars, we called them horseless carriages. And when they broke down, well, you just add a horse to it. And we're back fine. We know how to make it work with that. Or here's another one. This bridge is called the Iron Bridge. It's over the river, I forgot the name of the river, famous river in London, in Britain. But the bridge is kind of interesting because they built it initially out of a new technology, which was wrought iron. So it was a new building material. And they said, we're going to build the River Severn, is the name of the river. We're going to build use this new material and make a new bridge out of it. And how are we going to do that? Well, we have a lot of experience in making bridges out of wood. We'll just make it like we make wooden bridges. And so they did. They built the bridge using the same sort of joinery that we would use in a wooden bridge back before then. The problem was that iron is a lot heavier than wood. And as soon as they put the bridge together, it started to collapse. because this new material required us to do a new type of joinery, a new type of construction with it. We as humans tend to think of new technologies in old ways. We're just geared for that. We try to take new things and do them the way we've always done everything else. When computers first came out to be used for education, we thought of them largely as a cross between some sort of typewriter and calculator. And it took a really long time for us to begin to see the, wait a minute, a computer is something different than that. Then technology companies often would create their classrooms of the future, classrooms of tomorrow, and they would with a lot of excitement show these classrooms. And one of the ones I never forget, and I won't mention the company in this group, but this well-known company had created their classroom of tomorrow, and in the classroom there were rows of desks, and on every desk was a computer, and the students were all sitting looking at the computers, and the teacher was in the front of the room, and on every computer screen of the students was the teacher who was lecturing in the front of the room. They had just used the computers to replicate the lecture in real time for that. I never got why they were doing that, but that was the kind of, we think of new things in old ways. And that's a challenge for us, is to think of new things in new ways, especially things that are really new like AI. If you look at major paradigm shifts in society, 30 years ago, Charlie Riggle sort of came up with this. I added to it a little bit. But he looked at the different ages, agrarian age, industrial age, information age, knowledge age, and he looked at how has that affected different sectors of society. And in the transportation went from the horse to the train to the plane to the car, and now it's really diverse. Now we often as not send electrons instead of atoms. We don't actually physically transport things. We have video conferencing and whatnot. Families went from extended to nuclear to single parent, global village, business, families, bureaucracies, teams, distributed networks. Education kind of went from the one-room schoolhouse to our current system, to our current system, to our current system. It's, there have been little pockets of change here and there, but for the most part, education has not really changed very much as society has changed. Well, I take that back. We have made some change with technology and education. We've kind of gone from this to that. And you see that a lot of the time. So this was not the company I was talking about, by the way, in the earlier anecdote. We used technology to do things teachers are already good at. And we're doing it again with AI, which I'll point out in just a bit. In universities we do it this way, though, by the way. So that's how far we've gotten in a lot of it. And I'm doing this to you right now, so I'm not one to talk about it. I'm doing what this guy's doing there. It's a hard thing for us to get past with that. And this battle between technology and education and traditionalism has been going on forever. It really, really is a long thing. Every new technology that comes along, there are people who are for the new technology, people who are against the new technology. Calculators in schools, if you remember that, when calculators in schools came out, everybody said, no, you can't have calculators in schools. That's going to be horrible. But by 1975, the National Association of Mathematics Teachers said, yeah, no, wait a minute, you should have calculators. And over the next several years, various groups said, well, yeah, you got to have calculators to do everything. Weirdly, in 1997, 22 years after they first mathematics teachers had to have them, California banned them for some reason. And this would be a great dissertation that I would love for somebody to do and tell me what happened with that. I haven't been able to find the data. I guess California allows them now. I don't know, any of you Californians out there can tell us. But we see this again. When ChatGPT came out, you may remember Italy famously banned it for a couple of months. It went out. And we see a lot of people doing the same thing with AI now. Socrates is another one, and I know you can't read this, so I'll read it to you. I can almost hardly read it from here. Socrates said on writing, so Socrates thought, writing, that's a bad idea. That's going to ruin education. And he said, you provide your students with the appearance of wisdom, not with its reality. Your invention will enable them to hear many things without being properly taught, and they will imagine that they have come to know much, while they, for the most part, will know nothing. And they will be difficult to get along with, since they will merely appear to be wise instead of really being so. Now, Plato wrote that down in 347 BC for that. So we've had this reaction to technology all the same time. We've also had positive reactions. Edison in 1923 said, hey, you know what? Film is going to replace everything. textbooks, whatever. No, it's all going to be film coming out very rapidly. And so Rob showed us already, looking at the future, the Gartner hype cycle. And that happens with all technologies. Last year, this was Gartner's technology hype cycle. I know you can't read it. But right at the very top of the peak, there is generative AI. And so the Gartner prediction is we're peaking in the hype on AI, or if it's going to hit the plateau or the trough of disillusionment, and then we'll work our way back up to where it's useful. And you see this with things like Sundar Pichai, who's Google's parent company's CEO, who said all of the most, as AI is one of the most important things humanity is working on, it's more profound than, I don't know, electricity or fire. So that's pretty big hype right there. But he's also a pretty smart guy. And I'm not personally convinced we've hit the peak of hype of AI yet. It's really so hard to grasp what AI is and where it's going to go that I'm still holding off on this. So how does this affect higher education? Now, I know you guys are all from various aspects of higher education. I focus on higher education pretty much, and my Center for 21st Century Universities is generally higher ed focused with that. But what I'm talking about applies across most realms of education. Well, there's a problem in education. And economist Baumol, back in the 80s, I think, sort of summed it up as something called cost disease. And what Baumol said was, certain sectors of society benefit from gains in productivity more than other sectors. And he gives the example of a string quartet. And he says, if you have a string quartet that's working up a piece of music that they're going to play, it takes them the same amount of time to work up that string quartet, to work up that piece of music now as it took them 200 years ago, as it took them 400 years ago. They really have been no productivity gains in terms of string quartets getting ready to perform something. But other sectors of society have benefited enormously from productivity or productivity gains, and so we pay those people a lot more. So now we got to pay the string quartet players a lot more just so they can live in this more expensive society that has had the productivity gains. Service industries requiring highly skilled workers are what are subject to this cost disease, this lack of productivity increases. And in this little graph here, which is a hypothetical one about AI, the two industries that are like this are medicine and education. Both medicine and education require highly skilled people who are essentially in a service industry, who are working with individuals, and often in a one-to-one basis. And it's difficult to realize productivity gains for that. Now, we went to our current model of schooling largely because we thought it would improve productivity. We saw Henry Ford with the production line. We thought, well, let's do something similar to that as a productivity sort of model. And we haven't really gotten out of that. But it may be possible that now we're at a time when we could begin to get out of it. Here's why that productivity thing is an issue, though. Benjamin Bloom, who's well known for his Bloom's taxonomy of learning outcomes. Well, Bloom also did a series of studies on essentially productivity in learning and effectiveness. And he said, well, what's effective? What's the most effective way to teach somebody something? And he came out with one-to-one tutoring. One-to-one tutoring is 2 standard deviations more effective than any other type of educational system. So it's called 2 sigma. The standard deviation is sigma. So this is called Bloom's 2 sigma problem. If you look at a standard classroom or the mastery learning approach, which Bloom favored, either of those are, one-to-one tutoring is 2 sigma beyond the mastery, beyond the standard classroom. Educational technology has, for the most part, tried to solve this problem. A lot of what we've been trying to do is figure out, how do we realize gains in productivity? How can we take technology, the way many other sectors have done, and improve learning outcomes? And we've never yet done it. We've never yet got to the one-to-one tutoring that Bloom had set up for us. Now maybe we can, though. Maybe we can do that. The notion, and I think Rob mentions this, of personalized AI tutors. A lot of people are working on this. You can't now have one tutor for every student because it just doesn't scale. And we talked about it's not scalable. But maybe now with AI, we can begin to scale this. So this book, The Diamond Age, by the way, this is the only photo credit is mine there. That's actually my copy of the book on my back deck, well-worn copy. In this book, The Diamond Age, back in the 80s, Neil Stephenson, the book is about this. If you haven't read this, it's really worth a read. If you're not a science fiction fan, you gotta kind of get past the first 90 pages. But once you're into the 90 pages, it's all about educational technology and what happens with that technology. And what he envisioned was, here's a system where you got a one-to-one tutor for every single student. And that's the holy grail, in a sense, of what AI is about now, is creating this every student gets their own individual tutor. We make up for all the cost disease. We solve Bloom's 2 sigma problem when we do this. And a lot of the AI work is about that. Not all of it, but that's a good bit of it. I like to think of it in another way. I like to think of it like this guy. So Harry Nyquist was a researcher at Bell Labs in the 60s, I think. The lawyers at Bell Labs were doing some efficiency studies, and they said, why is it that some of our people have so many more patents than other people? And they did a really pretty in-depth study to determine why some people just were so much more productive in terms of patents than everybody else. They couldn't find anything that unified these people, except that they all frequently had lunch or breakfast with Harry Nyquist. Now, Harry was not one of the more productive people, but he had a way of bringing out the productivity in other people. And he was really good at getting them to consolidate their ideas and move those ideas forward. I think that's probably where we're headed with AI for us. We want AI to be our own Harry Nyquist, to be our own sort of personalized tutor going forward. And we're doing some work to try and get there. We see a lot of things now about how smart is ChatGPT or any of the AI models that are out there, Cloud Opus or Llama or whatever. And so this is a little graph. You can't read it, but it's how well ChatGPT, which is GPT 3.5, versus GPT 4.0 does on some of the standardized tests. And the first one is the verbal portion of the GRE, and so you can see that GPT-4 is at the 99th percentile, the verbal portion of the GRE. And you can see that there are various other tests going down, the LSAT, I can't even read them from here, apologize. But many of the different tests, biology and so forth, the large language model is scoring, ChatGPT scoring very, very highly on that. Those of you who are humanities folks, by the way, the ones it scores the worst on are English. English literature, English language, and the very bottom is competitive coding. And I'm not sure what the competitive aspect makes a difference of it. But as you can see, the different AIs, different generative AIs, are doing really well on sort of standardized tests. But that doesn't matter all that much in terms of humanity. Because a test is not the same as a task. You can score well on a task, and by the way, the large language models have trained on some of these tests, so it makes sense they're going to do good on them. But when you get them to do a task, that becomes more complex. A task is not the same as a job, because a job is made of many, many tasks. And a job is not the same as a career, which is a lifetime of dealing with changing circumstances and different things. The issues really become one of wisdom and judgment. That humans are particularly good. No, I know people who are saying, oh no, wait, wisdom doesn't associate with this person. But generally speaking, we're good at wisdom and judgment. We're good at managing complex adaptive systems to do that. Now, my colleague Chris Deedy, who also is a colleague on AI Allo that Rob mentioned earlier, he wrote that the current curriculum and high-stakes tests, our current system, prioritize fostering skills at which AI excels. We're trying to teach people to do the things AI is good at, in kind of a flip from the way we usually use technology to do the things people are good at, such as reckoning skills involving calculative prediction and formulaic decision making. However, AI cannot easily replicate human judgment. which is a deliberative thought process that's flexible and contextual, based on experiential knowledge, ethics, values, relationships, and culture. That's the difference, I think. So AI is advancing so fast that it's hard to know, where it's going to end up. But it's a pretty big gap still to get to AI's wisdom and judgment. GPT, large language models, the way they work is actually pretty simple. On the one hand, they just predict what word is most likely to come next. And you give it a sentence, my favorite animal is a, and it's going to think, oh, well, dog is the most likely answer here. Sorry, you cat people. The dog is the most likely answer here, and so it pops dog in, is the next most likely word. And then it says, what's the next most likely word after that? Well, given those words, because maybe is the next most likely word. And then the word after that goes on and on. And they can tweak this, and they're getting better and better at it. We don't really understand how it works, how it gets some of the uncanny answers that it has. OpenAI this week said, Sam Altman said, we don't fully understand how GPT works with that. So we're working at it. But the judgment part is really difficult for it to do. Now, in our work in AI Ally, we have 3 national AI institutes at Georgia Tech. And as Rob mentioned, the one that I'm a part of is the one for adult learning and online education. We're working on several different products and things. We were working on this before large language models came out. So we started maybe 2 years before you begin to see the large language model GPT. Don't forget, LLMs, large language models, or generative predictive transformers, the GPT LLM models, that's just one part of AI. There's a whole ton of other types of AI, neural network types of things, and various machine learning techniques that don't involve the trick that GPT does at all with that, and they're still going forward. So we were working on that before we got GPT. We've really got 4 main thrusts that we're working on. One of them is AI teaching assistants, and that's kind of that holy grail, the personalized tutor for learning. The most famous of these, by the way, has been around a while. You may have heard of Jill Watson, who our colleague Ashok Goyal came up with. And so Jill Watson is a AI teaching assistant. And there's got a lot of press that in one of the early studies, he introduced Jill Watson into a very large online course about AI. And there were 10 TAs, 10 teaching assistants in that course, one of whom was an AI, the other 9 were humans. At the end of the course, not only did none of the students realize Jill Watson was an AI, 2 of the students nominated Jill Watson for a teaching award. With that. That's how good. And Jill Watson has improved since then, by the way. In fact, we just now, Ashok said that they just now have some evidence that actually it improved learning outcomes as well. So we haven't published that yet, but that's coming out. So that's something. That's the holy grail. Can we build these personalized learning assistants? By the way, once LLM came out, we added LLM GPT to Jill Watson. And what we found, the primary thing we found was it vastly reduced the time it takes to create a Jill Watson for a course. It used to take about 100 hours to create a Jill Watson level AI for a course. Now it takes about 10 hours using the GPT stuff. So that's a real benefit in terms of enhancing that productivity. Another one we're looking at is environments. So can we use AI to build environments, personalization of learning at scale? In a way, you could think of this like as an iteration of textbooks. How do we use AI to help students build conceptual maps and to enhance their transfer and retention of learning? Another one is the architecture for it. That's one that this group really comes in. We're using Caliper for that, is helping us build the data architectures for this. Think about if you're building a personalized AI tutor, that AI tutor has to know a lot about the learner. If it's going to individually teach a learner, what knowledge does it has to have of that learner? Probably a lot. It needs to know what the learner knows. It needs to know how the learner reads, the things the learner is interested in. Learning styles don't exist, by the way, so it doesn't need to know learning styles. But there are various individual differences that are in the psychological literature, and it needs to know those. How do you figure out which ones of those matter, and how do you orchestrate them into a data set? How do you build the data architecture for that? Maybe you need a comprehensive learner record, which I think you will. And so that's part of it. The one I'm really like, and the one I'm interested in though, is AI and human interaction. There's some really interesting questions in how we interact with AIs. One of them is, can we allow people to build their own AIs? Because I think we'll end up doing that. I would wish I had an AI for telling me how to watch live sports in streaming on my TV, because I buy a service, I watch a sport, it ends, and I am stuck paying for that service. And I just navigate that. But I would like to build all sorts of little AIs to help me along the way. Another, though, is explainability. We don't understand all the time how AIs work. We don't know why they give us the answers they give us a lot of the time. Can the AI explain that to us? That's a real issue that I think we need to have great progress on to help us understand why AIs are telling us the answer they're telling us. So this explainability answer is a big one. And then a third is something a lot of people are working on in AI, and that's called theory of mind. We all have theories of each other's mind. I just looking at you, I get a sense of, you're a human, you're here at this conference, I have some sense of how you think. Maybe it's wrong, but it's at least along the way. We don't have any theory of mind with AIs. We don't know how the AI's mind works. AIs, more importantly, don't have any theory of mind for us. Remember, large language models, they're just saying what word comes next with that. Can we get the AIs to develop a theory of mind for humans? Can they begin to understand why and how we are thinking? And that to me is really interesting, that I hope we'll make progress on. So just funny that Rob also mentioned this, it was coming up. Where we have to go, we can't be trying to play catch up with AIs and learning right now. What we've really got to do is focus on durable skills. All the content in the world is available to us at our fingertips. We all have it in our phones and our pockets right now. Remember, our phones pretty much are going to soon have the capacity of a human brain. Not before long, they'll have the capacity of all human brains. What makes the difference is that wisdom and judgment. So to get to that, durable skills, and you see this durable skills notion growing. Sometimes it was called 21st century skills or things like that, but I'm seeing durable skills as a term which is gaining traction. Durable skills, things like character, mindfulness, metacognition, leadership, growth mindsets, fortitude, critical thinking, creativity, communications, and collaboration. And those branch out into smaller and smaller skills. That's really, I think, what we ought to be focusing on in our education systems, and more importantly, what we ought to be assessing for. If we're assessing for whether learners possess these sorts of skills, that solves the problem of did they use AI to do it. It really makes us get at a much better sense of what sorts of things learners will do to succeed in the future. Now here's what Rob did mention, routine expertise versus adaptive expertise. I think this is an example of durable skills give you adaptive expertise. I think of it this way. A routine expert is something like a line cook. You give that line cook a set of ingredients and a recipe, and they'll follow that recipe and they'll make the same thing, and it'll come out the same way almost all the time. But that's different than a chef. A chef is able to look at a whole lot of different ingredients, take in mind what the theory of mind of the diner, the palate of the diner, and create new recipes and combine them. They understand conceptually how these things go together. And this building this adaptive expertise, I think, really needs to become more of a focus. And you build that, by the way, through durable skills, which is, I think, where we need to go. AI can help us get there, but it's not going to be easy. In technology, if you've been around a long time, back when we were looking at computer-based education, this was a framework that worked there, and I think it works well now too. A lot of learning about AI now, a lot of what we're doing with AI is learning about AI. We're learning the things AI does and things like that. And that's the bulk of it. And that'll be the bulk of it for a while. I get asked to talk about that a lot, but it's not really useful. I couldn't tell you how my TV works, but I know how to use it with that. The next little stage is learning from AI, and that's where I mentioned was the holy grail, as we're sort of building the AI tutors. And I think that will be valuable, and that will help us solve the cost disease programs. But really the strength of where we need to go is learning with AI. How do we use AI as a tool to do things that we can't do now? Learning with AI is sort of the goal. It's augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence. I'll end with this and then a final quote. So I think I'm right on time. Not bad. So in 1997, Gary Kasparov lost his rematch with Deep Blue, IBM's chess computer, which, by the way, eventually evolved into the Jill Watson that I mentioned to you earlier. So lost to Deep Blue, first human ever to lose to a computer in chess. And he kind of moped around a while. And then he went on and created a new kind of chess called battle chess. And that name might have got taken by a video game. But it was a chess where groups of people would play each other, and they could use computers to help them play. And so a couple of years after that, in the World Battle Chess Championship, the finals came down to a group of 3 grandmaster chess players and a group of 3 average chess players, and they were both using the same computer system. And the average chess players beat the grandmasters because the average chess players were also software engineers. And they knew how to use that computer to really augment their playing in a way that the grandmasters weren't able to take advantage of with that. They were working with AI, as you will. By the way, I tried to find out what happened with this old battle chess. It's gone now, because for about the last 20 years, no human has beat a computer at chess for that. And so in the battle chess, we have humans plus computers. The smart people will just say, okay, computer, you do it. And that computer would always win for that. But the AI now, I think we're in this augmented stage where we've really got to work with computers. I'll leave you with this last thought from Ginni Rometty, who's IBM's executive chairman in 2022. As artificial intelligence evolves, we must remember that its power lies not in replacing human intelligence, but in augmenting it. The true potential of AI lies in its ability to amplify human creativity and ingenuity. And if we can gain that perspective and use it going forward, I think we'll be well served. Thank you very much.